You know, when we talk about protecting the environment, it always sounds like this big fight, right? But what if it's not a fight at all? What if it's actually an economic puzzle? A puzzle with hidden costs and, believe it or not, some really powerful incentives. Today, we're going to dive into how putting a price tag on pollution might just be the key to solving this thing and building a cleaner world for all of us.
Just listen to this. We're talking about air so dirty, it melted nylon stockings right off women's legs. Headlights on at noon. I mean, that sounds like something out of a dystopian movie, right? But nope, this was real life. This was Chattanooga, Tennessee, before the 1970s. And when you hear something like that, it just makes you stop and ask a really big fundamental question.
So if the market, the engine that drives our economy, creates a huge problem like pollution, how in the world do we fix it? It's a tricky one. And the answer isn't as simple as just writing a bunch of new laws. It's actually about getting clever and using the same economic forces that caused the problem to begin with to find the solution.
Okay, so first things first. To understand the solution, we've got to get to the heart of the problem. And it all comes down to these invisible costs. Things that are very, very real, but you'd never see them on a company's financial report.
All right, so this invisible cost has a technical name. Economists call it an externality. Really, it's just a fancy word for a spillover effect. Here's a simple way to think about it. Imagine a concert. The venue sells a ticket to a fan. That's the deal, right? But what about the neighborhood next door that has to listen to the booming bass all night? That noise is the externality. It's a side effect of the deal that hits a third party who had absolutely no say in it. And when it comes to the environment, pollution is basically the biggest, baddest negative externality there is.
Let's break this down with a real-world example. A factory making refrigerators. The company pays for the steel, the plastic, the workers' salaries. Those are its private costs. They're on the books. But what about the smoke coming out of the smokestack? That pollution can lead to asthma, it can lower property values. Those are the external costs, the cost to society. And here's the kicker. In a totally free market, the factory doesn't pay a dime for those external costs. They're invisible to the business. So, check this out. When the factory only has to worry about its own private costs, the market finds a sweet spot. Supply meets demand right at $650 per fridge. At that price, they sell 45,000 of them. The company's happy, the customer's happy, everyone involved in the transaction is good. But the rest of us, the community, we're stuck with the bill for the pollution.
But now let's change the game. What if we force the factory to pay for its pollution? Let's say we add $100 social cost to each fridge. Well, look what happens. The math completely changes. The new price where supply meets demand jumps up to $700. And because they're more expensive, fewer people buy them. Only 40,000 get sold. And the best part? Fewer refrigerators being made means, you guessed it, less pollution.
This whole situation where the market by itself ends up producing way too much of a polluting product because it's completely ignoring the true cost to society, that's what economists call a market failure. It means the free market, left all alone, didn't get it right. It failed to create the best outcome for everybody. So, the big question is, how do we step in and fix this?
Well, the first and probably most obvious solution was just to, write a rule book. This is the classic command and control approach.
And it's pretty simple, really. The government just says, okay, you can only pollute this much. And sometimes they'll even tell companies exactly what technology they have to install to do it. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, these are famous examples. And hey, let's give credit where it's due. This approach worked. It's a huge reason why places like Chattanooga got cleaned up. But from a purely economic point of view, it's not perfect. It's got some pretty big drawbacks. So what's wrong with it? Well, for starters, once a company hits the legal limit for pollution, they're done. There's absolutely no reason for them to try and do any better. They've checked the box. Second, it's a one-size-fits-all solution. It might tell two different factories to use the exact same scrubber, even if one of those factories could cut its pollution for half the cost using a totally different, newer method. And of course, these rules are made in the political world, so they can get messy with loopholes and special exceptions.
So all these issues got economists thinking, what if there's a smarter way? Instead of rigid, top-down rules, what if we used flexible incentives? Instead of forcing a specific technology on everyone, what if we could spark some innovation and let companies figure out the best and cheapest ways to clean up their act?
And that brings us to solution number 2, which you can think of as the incentive plan. This is all about using tools from the market itself to solve a market problem. It's about getting the job done, but way more efficiently.
So what's in this new toolkit?
Well, there are three main gadgets. You've got pollution charges, which is basically just a tax on every ton of gunk you emit. Then there are marketable permits, which you might have heard of as cap and trade. And finally, there's the idea of better defined property rights, which helps sort out who's actually on the hook for environmental damage.
Now, what's so brilliant about these tools is that they all share the same secret sauce. They all force the polluter to pay for that externality we talked about. They take that invisible cost and slap a price tag on it, making it very, very visible on the company's balance sheet. And suddenly, there's a huge financial incentive to clean up, because now every ton of pollution you don't release is actual money saved. It's cash back in your pocket.
Okay, so we've got the tools to fight pollution more efficiently. That's great. But it leads to an even bigger question. It's not just about how we clean up. It's about how clean is clean enough. Should we be aiming for zero pollution, period? Well, from an economic perspective, the answer is probably not. And that might sound a little strange.
To get our heads around this, let's look at some real numbers. The EPA did this massive study, looking at the first 20 years of the Clean Air Act. They wanted to answer one simple question: were the results worth the price tag?
First up, the costs. All told, complying with the Clean Air Act for those 2 decades cost the U.S. economy about $500 billion. Let that sink in. $500 billion. That is a staggering amount of money. So, was it worth it?
Well, hold on to your hats. The EPA estimated that the benefits, mostly from things like better public health and people living longer, were worth $22 trillion. That's not a typo. $22 trillion. For every $1 we spent, we got $44 back in benefits. I mean, wow. The benefits didn't just outweigh the costs, they absolutely crushed them. But, and this is a big but, that still doesn't mean we should just write a blank check for perfect air.
And this is where economists start talking about thinking at the margin. Look, when the air is disgusting, like it was in Chattanooga, the first few steps you take to clean it up are relatively cheap, and the benefits are massive. You get a huge bang for your buck. But as the air gets cleaner and cleaner, it gets way more expensive to filter out those last few tiny particles of pollution. And the extra health benefit you get from that is pretty small. So the economic sweet spot, the efficient point, is where the cost of cleaning up one more little bit of pollution is exactly equal to the benefit you get from it. After that point, you're just spending more than it's worth.
All right, so this idea of balancing costs and benefits isn't just a local issue. It scales up. And that brings us to our final piece of the puzzle, the Global Balancing Act. Because this same logic is at the core of pretty much every international environmental debate. Here's the deal. Every single country on the planet faces this basic trade-off. Economists have a name for it, the production possibility frontier, but all it really means is that you have a choice. You can have more economic output, or you can have more environmental protection. You can pick any point along that curve, but you can't have 100% of both. It's a fundamental choice you have to make. And different countries make totally different choices here. You know, a low-income nation might be focused on economic growth just to provide food and shelter for its people. They might choose to accept more pollution in the short term. Meanwhile, a wealthier country might be more willing and able to spend money on a cleaner environment. You see this play out all the time in debates over big projects, right? Think about things like oil pipelines. It's always a battle between the economic benefits and the environmental risks. The real value of these market-based tools is that they make this trade-off less painful. They help us squeeze out more environmental protection for every bit of economic growth we might have to sacrifice. So, at the end of the day, economics can give us a fantastic toolkit. It helps us understand the trade-offs and make our choices smarter and more efficient. But what it can't do is tell us what to choose. That decision, where we want to be on that curve, how we balance our economy with our environment, that's on us. These tools just make our choices clearer. But along that frontier of what's possible, what kind of future are we actually going to choose to build?